Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. This time we're digging into a book that really got you guys talking, Society's Breakthrough, Releasing Essential Wisdom by Jim Ruff. A lot of big ideas in here, and honestly, who isn't looking for a breakthrough these days?
Yeah, it's a fascinating read. Ruff really challenges us to think about how our systems themselves might be the problem. Not just the people in power, but the whole structure.
Okay, so it's not just that we've got the wrong folks at the top, it's that the whole game's rigged.
That's the gist, yeah. He compares society to a game, with winners and losers. And that kind of thinking, he says, makes us make choices that, sure, maybe they benefit some folks right now, but long term, it screws everyone over.
It's like that saying, we all live downstream, right? Sooner or later, the pollution catches up.
Exactly. And the book's full of real-world examples of this. Like, remember those aluminum companies up in the Northwest?
Ooh, yeah, vaguely. Remind me about that one.
So they were getting all this cheap power from those big hydroelectric dams. The idea was to bring jobs to those rural areas. But then energy prices went way up,
Right.
and these companies, instead of creating jobs, what do? They just shut down their plants and sold that power back at a massive profit. Totally took advantage of the system, completely ignoring the whole point of the cheap power quotas.
Wow. So they won the game, but the communities they were supposed to be helping lost big time. It really makes you think, how much of what we just accept as that's just how it is actually rigged against most people?
Right. And that's Ruff's main point. He says this gotta-win mentality, it's everywhere. From huge corporations down to how we treat each other sometimes. It keeps us from working together to solve problems because we're so busy trying to get one over on each other.
Okay, so if the problem is the system itself, not just the players, what's the solution? Don't leave us hanging here.
Well, his big idea is a constitutional amendment. He calls it the Citizens Amendment. And it would create this thing called a wisdom council to deal with the big, important issues.
A wisdom council. Sounds kind of cruel, but also maybe a little too good to be true.
I mean, it's a pretty radical idea, I'll grant you that. Basically, every year, a group of random citizens would get together for a week. Their job would be to come up with solutions to the biggest problems the country's facing.
So like jury duty, but for like the fate of the nation.
You could say that, but here's the thing. It wouldn't be voting or arguing like in our usual political system. They'd use this method called choice-creating conversation.
Choice creating. Sounds a lot less stressful than those shouting matches we see on TV.
Right. It's about really digging deep into the issues, listening to each other's points of view, and trying to find a solution everyone actually supports. Not just a compromise where nobody's happy or where the majority just steamrolls the minority.
So it's not about winning or losing. It's about actually making something new that works for everybody.
Exactly. And then at the end of the week, they'd present what they came up with to the country. It wouldn't be a law, but it would have the weight of a bunch of different people who really spent time thinking it through.
It's like they'd be concentrating the nation's wisdom instead of just fighting for their own side.
Right. And every year there'd be a new council. So it's always going on, always keeping track of what people actually care about.
This Citizens Amendment is really different from how we do things now. Ruff uses some interesting ways to describe this shift in how power works, right?
Yeah. He talks about these three systems, the triangle, the box, and the circle.
Okay, I like where this is going. Break those down for me.
So the triangle, that's the classic top-down power structure. Think kings, dictators, that old school way of doing things. Then you got the box, which is more like our system today. It's all about rules, laws, agreements.
Yeah.
And that often leads to that game mentality we were talking about earlier.
Right, so the Constitution's like the rule book and we're all in the game trying to win.
Exactly. But Ruff says we need to move towards a circle system, one that focuses on talking things out, working together, and finding solutions everyone's on board with.
So the Wisdom Council is kind of like the embodiment of that circle system.
Absolutely. The whole point of the Citizens Amendment is to make that shift.
Yeah.
From competition and control to cooperation and actually understanding each other.
Okay, so we've got the problem, this box system that keeps us in that win-lose mindset. And we've got Ruff's radical solution, the Citizens Amendment and the Wisdom Council, to move us towards the circle. But why does he think this could actually work? What's the upside of all this?
Well, Ruff thinks the Wisdom Council could find solutions to problems our current system just can't seem to handle.
So it's not just about doing things differently, it's about getting different results.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, take the tragedy of the commons.
Right. The classic example of how if everyone's just looking out for themselves, it can ruin things for everybody.
Right. And he points out that our usual ways of dealing with that, regulations, incentives, privatization, those kinds of things, they often just treat the symptoms, not the root cause.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg.
Exactly. But a wisdom council, because they're focused on the long term and what's good for the whole community, they're less likely to fall into those traps.
Because they're not trying to win, they're trying to figure out what's best for everyone.
Exactly. And Ruff thinks that shift from me to we can happen through this choice-creating conversation. When people really listen to each other and understand different points of view, they can create solutions that get to the heart of the problem and that work for everyone.
So it's not just about managing stuff, it's about changing how we think. And Ruff calls this turning society on. What's that about?
He says the Wisdom Council could get people really engaged in shaping the future. It's about moving away from, not caring and just being cynical and moving towards a feeling of purpose, that we're all in this together.
Like rekindling that sense of community.
Yeah, exactly. And this connects to another cool idea he talks about, changing our mythology.
Okay, now that sounds interesting. Tell me more.
So Ruff thinks we got to change the stories that shape how we see ourselves in society. He says the story we have now is often about the hero, this idea that some lone person is going to swoop in and save the day.
Classic Hollywood ending.
Right. But he says that story just doesn't work for the kind of complicated problems we have today. We need a story about collective action, where normal people have the power to make a difference together.
So the Wisdom Council is kind of like a symbol of that new story.
Exactly. It shows that we don't have to wait for some hero. We have the wisdom to solve our problems together.
Like going from Superman to a whole team of everyday heroes.
I like that, yeah. And this shift in the story, this move to the circle, could also change our relationship with government.
How so?
Ruff says the Wisdom Council could help break down that us versus them thing we often have with government. Instead of seeing it as this distant, scary thing, we could start to see it as a partner, as an extension of our collective will.
More like we the people working with the government instead of always fighting against it.
Exactly. It's about feeling like we're all responsible for how things go in our society.
This is a pretty radical way to rethink how things could work. But let's be real, there's going to be some people who aren't buying it.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things people might be worried about with this whole citizens amendment idea?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is, can a group of random people really agree on anything?
Right. Seems like it'd be easy to get stuck in arguments and end up with nothing getting done.
That's a fair point. But Ruff says the key is that choice-creating dialogue. Remember, it's not about forcing a compromise or settling for the bare minimum everyone can tolerate. It's about finding solutions that everyone actually likes, even if they started with totally different ideas.
So it's about expanding what's possible, not just arguing over the same old options.
Yeah, exactly. And the facilitator is really important in guiding the conversation toward that goal, making sure everyone feels heard and respected.
Makes sense. But even with a good facilitator, wouldn't there still be a risk of people being manipulated or things getting biased? I mean, we were just talking about how easy it is to game the system.
Ruff knows that's a risk, for sure. But he says that randomly picking people for the council and having everything be transparent, that would help reduce the risk.
So it would be a lot harder for special interest groups to control things, and everyone would see how the decisions were made.
Exactly. Plus, the facilitator would be in charge of making sure the process is fair and open, keeping things on track, and not letting any one person or group take over.
It sounds like the facilitator is a pretty important part of making this work. Someone who's really neutral and good at handling tough conversations.
Definitely. But even with all that, some folks might still say, this is all just wishful thinking. It could never actually work.
It is a big change, and change can be scary, especially when it's about something as basic as how our society works.
Yeah, and Ruff knows that. He knows making this citizens' amendment happen would require everyone to think differently and to be open to a whole new way of doing things.
It'd take a collective aha moment, like everyone realizing the old ways aren't working and we need to try something totally new.
Right. And he thinks his book can help make that happen. By showing the problems and offering a different way to do things, He wants to start a conversation and get people imagining a better future.
It's like a call to action, an invitation to step outside that box and see what's possible if we change the rules.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And he uses real examples of wisdom councils that have actually worked in smaller groups.
So it's not just a pie-in-the-sky idea, it's something that's been done before.
Exactly. These examples show that this choice-creating conversation can lead to real solutions that are good for everyone.
And maybe seeing it work on a smaller scale can help us see how it could work for the whole country.
That's what he's hoping for. This book makes us think differently about how we deal with the big problems we face. It asks, could this wisdom council actually lead to better choices and a world that's fair and more sustainable?
It's a big question and one worth thinking about.
For sure. The book doesn't say it has all the answers, but it gives us a way to think about these things differently. And it encourages us to imagine what could be.
It's the beginning of a conversation that needs to happen.
Exactly. And it's a conversation everyone can be a part of.
So we've looked at the problem, the solution, the good things that could come from it, and the challenges. But what does all this mean for the person listening? Why should they care?
That's the important question. I think this deep dive into society's breakthrough has some key things for you to take away.
All right, let's hear them.
First, it challenges you to think about your own ideas about how society works. Are we really a democracy? Or are we stuck in this game that limits our choices and stops us from dealing with the really important stuff?
It's about realizing we might be trapped in that box without even knowing it.
Right. And second, it makes you think about the power of that choice-creating conversation.
Oh.
Could actually talking to each other and listening to different views lead to breakthroughs and create solutions that are good for everyone?
It's about going beyond just arguing and finding new ways to deal with tough issues.
Exactly. And third, it helps you believe that you can be part of making a better future. This citizens' amendment might seem like a huge change, but it's really about giving regular people a voice and a role in how our democracy works.
It reminds us that we together have the wisdom and the ability to create a better future.
That's a powerful message, for one we should all remember.
So we've covered the main points of society's breakthrough, but like always, we want to leave you with something to think about, a question to keep the conversation going.
What's interesting is that this book asks a question that's even bigger than just the Citizens Amendment and the Wisdom Council.
Intriguing. What's the question?
It asks what kind of society we want to live in and how we can create it together.
It's a question about our values, what we want to achieve, and our responsibility to build a world that reflects those values.
Right. And it's a question each of us needs to answer for ourselves.
So as you go about your day, think about what a truly just and sustainable society would look like to you. What would be important in that society? And what can you do to make that society a reality?
It's about being proactive, not just reacting to problems. Creating the world we want, not just letting things happen to us.
A call to action, but also a call to use our imaginations.
Exactly. And Ruff actually gives us some practical tools to help us do that. One that really stuck with me was this idea of tobes.
Tobes, that's a new one.
Yeah, he uses it to describe those moments when we purposely stop back from the craziness of everyday life and just kind of take stock of things.
Like hitting the pause button before we get swept away by the current.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Ruff says these tobes are really important for breaking out of those old ways of thinking and acting, the ones that keep us stuck. They help us see things in a new way and be open to new possibilities.
So it's about making space to think and question our assumptions.
Yeah, exactly. And these tobes can happen for individuals, but also for society as a whole. Ruff thinks the Wisdom Council itself could be like a national tobe.
A time for the whole country to stop and think about where we are and where we want to go.
Exactly. But he also says individual tobes are important. Taking time to look inward, think about our values, and figure out what really matters to us.
It's about making choices on purpose, being more conscious.
Right. And this connects back to that idea of changing our mythology. When we take a step back and think, we can start to question the stories we tell ourselves about the world and how we fit into it.
We can rewrite the narrative.
Exactly. And Ruff says we need a new story, one that gives us the power to create a future that's fairer and more sustainable.
A story that's about working together, caring for each other, and respecting how everything's connected.
That's a great way to say it. And this new story can come from those choice-creating conversations we were talking about, both in the Wisdom Council and in our own personal reflections.
It's about creating a new story together, one that leads us towards a better future.
That's a powerful image. And this book gives us the tools and inspiration to start writing that story.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into society's breakthrough, I want to encourage you to use those tools. Take some tobes, think about your values, have those choice-creating conversations, and most importantly, believe that you can make a difference.
Don't forget, the future doesn't just happen. We create it together.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into society's breakthrough. Until next time, keep questioning, keep imagining, and keep working towards a world that reflects the best of humanity.
And don't forget those tobes along the way.
See you next time.
See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.